Section 3, Chapter 6, Marking Time. I didn't keep a calendar on my wall. I didn't need one. I knew how many days I had been in, and I figured in my mind how many days I had left. Like me, a lot of guys kept time in their heads, but everyone had their own system. Most X off the days in the calendar. Some tallied up numbers like card players, 4 marks down and 1 across, like little gates. One guy I knew took the corner of a razor blade to his arm and made a small cut on it each day. He wanted the scars as a reminder of his pain, and I couldn't wait until I got out so I could begin to forget. One thing I noticed is the guy never told anyone their exact exit date. They left silently, no parties, no backslapping, no address change. They just vanished. It was the safest way to leave. No one wanted some jealous freak or some psycho with a grudge to jump him on the way out. For me, Sundays were the worst. I counted out the days in units of 7. All my numbers were divided by or multiplied by 7, and every Sunday when I got to the end of another unit, I was torn between thinking that another week of my life had been lost and that I was 1 week closer to my exit. In order to make time pass more quickly, I got permission to go down to the medical office where I cleaned up the x-ray room and the developing room. Mr. Akers, a prison administrator, had me mop and clean his office too. The floor guard was always unlocked Mr. Akers' office for me and then lock it behind me when I finished, and the guard never stayed while I cleaned it but drifted back down the hall to his post. I was cleaning one Sunday morning when I noticed Mr. Akers had failed to lock the medical file cabinet, which held the records but duplicate paperwork for the main records. I knew my file was in there and I wanted to read it. I opened the office door and looked down the hall. The guard was still at his post chatting with another guard. I quietly closed the door and dashed the file cabinet and pulled open the drawer. I fingered across the file until I found mine and pulled it out, and I rechecked the guard. He was still chatting. I opened my file and the parole board report was on top. I read it as fast as I could. They called me uncooperative and unwilling to tell the truth. It was crushing. I felt like screaming. Even though I had fucked up, I wasn't a fuck up, but there was no way I could explain this to anyone. After all, it didn't matter who I was. I was what I had done, and that now defined me. I turned the page. The results of my meeting with the psychiatrist were listed. He summarized me as situational sociopath, willing to give answers that attempted to redefine who he was, rather than to be honestly describing myself. Perhaps the doctor wrote he doesn't have a capacity to entirely articulate who he is. That was a fancy way of calling me a liar. I flipped away through the rest of my chart, and my caseworker, Mr. Wilcox said I was a danger to myself and others and ranked me as a minimum security risk, or it was not a danger. That was reassuring. I closed the file and checked the door, and the guard was still talking. I returned to my file to the drawer, closed it, and locked the cabinet. When I was back in my cell, I recorded everything I could remember from my papers. Even though most of it was so discouraging, I felt anxious. I tried to shrug it off and read it, but I couldn't concentrate. I paced the cell thinking about what was in some kind of reverse mental institution where I'd get a release once I was totally screwed up. I tried to sleep, but the anxiety stayed with me. The next morning, it was caught up to me. I was tired. I was shaving the staring hand in the mirror, hard in the mirror, which was warped by my face in the shape of an unshelled peanut. Suddenly, my heart started pounding, my neck swelled with pressure, my ears closed, my eyes glazed over, and I began to think I wouldn't make it out. And like so many other guys I had helped sew up, I would take the razor and begin to hack and slice myself only like a madman would. It wasn't a new thought for me to think I might go insane, but I had pushed the thought aside. This time the thought that I'd kill myself was unrelenting. As my hand began to shake, I knew I was a moment away from hurting myself. I dove toward my cell door as if from the path of a speeding train. I shoved the razor out of the metal slot, then dropped down and did push-ups until I couldn't do any more, and I lay there stretched out on the hard floor, feeling the warmth of my body replace the cold of the concrete. By the time the count guard came by, I was sitting on my bunk, half-shaved and trying to will my shaking foot into a shoe. Visiting hours were only on weekends, and no one ever came to see me anyway, so I was surprised when the hospital guard rapped on my door one weekend and unlocked it. Said, "You have a visitor," he said, 2 of them. I had no idea who it might be. I got dressed and followed the guard, and we passed through the first set of gates and entered the visiting room, and my father and Uncle Jim from Pennsylvania were sitting on the folding metal chairs and smoking cigarettes. They were slumped forward, made me realize they were drunk. "Son," Dad said, perking up when I walked in. He stood and lurched toward me. He hugged me, and I felt myself holding him up. He smelled of hard liquor, Canadian Club. That's what he always turned to when he wanted to get hammered. Uncle Jim grinned. How you doing, he asked, and I shrugged. A guard stepped forward. I'll give you 15 minutes, he said. Then he left the room. Goddamn place is closed up tight as a nun, Dad said. We had to bang on the front door to get somebody to open it up. It's a prison, I reminded him. He would have been here earlier, but Jim spotted a roadhouse, and we thought we'd have a few belts before coming in. You know, take the edge off of being here. He waved his arms around and stumbled. A chair fell over. I looked over toward the guard who was watching through the viewing window. Dad, I hate to tell you this, but visiting hours are Saturdays. They only called me up here because you came from so far away. Well, hell, he said. Can't a dad visit his son? During regular hours, I said. Look, I'm going to have to go in a few minutes. Is there anything you wanted to say? Wish I had a drink, he said and laughed. I walked over to the guard. Can he come back in the morning, I asked. Not until the weekend, he replied. You know the rules. I went back to my dad. Can you guys get a motel in town and come back on Saturday? We can have the whole day together. I got to be getting back to work, Jim said. Your dad's up for a visit, and we just thought we'd take a crack at running down here before and seeing you. Well, I'm disappointed, I said. It would be really nice to have someone time to talk. The guard tapped on the window. I gotta go, I said. Thanks for coming. I gave them a hug. Dad mumbled he said he loved me, and I mumbled the same thing back. At that moment, we were not so much in love as we were beat up from having loved each other. That's a powerful line. By the time I returned to my yellow room, I was fuming, just wanted to kick something. I was so mad that he had showed up without any thought of when it was all right to arrive and how it would look to the guards, and my dad was drunken slob beating on the front guard, hollering, let me in, I'm here to see my kid. I could just imagine some report going on my file describing my home life. I felt even more insane. But the time I finished writing about it, my journal had settled down. It was never like my dad to have a lot to talk about anyways, unless he had a good story to share. I'm sure he got drunk just in order to get up the nerve to walk in the door and tell me he loved me. And after the eruption of sentimentality, he wanted out. It was really hard for him than it was for me. It made me think it must be harder for the visitors to come in than for the prisoners to visit them. We were used to being inside, and for my dad to see his kid in prison locked up, it was killing him. Arriving drunk at the wrong time was the best way he could do, and not hurting myself was the best that I could do. After seeing my psychologist's report, I set up another meeting with the shrink. When I got in his chair in front of the desk, I noticed it was bolted to the ground. I had cleaned his office too, and I knew there was an alarm button under his desk, and he pressed for help. Although the guys didn't like the shrink for the same reason I didn't. He had too much power over our lives. His report of the parole board could extend your time behind bars, or he could recommend an early release. Visiting him again was a risk, but I needed to do damage control. Tell me about yourself, he said once again. I wasn't sure what to begin. Here's a hint, he said. Don't talk about your crime. What if that's all I got on my mind? Then let's start with your family, he said. I see here your father came to visit. Yeah, I said, it was great. He's a good father. What about your mom? He said. She's totally supportive. She's wonderful. And your brothers and sisters? I love them. I miss them. Do you have anything you want to talk about? The stress, or the feeling, or the anger, or the remorse? You know, I said, arranging my face into a sincere expression. I really worked through all of that hard emotional stuff. I'm just feeling pretty solid right now. Just doing my time and hoping to get on with meeting the positive goals of my life. Stared at me for a long time, longer than normal. Minutes passed. I sat there holding my trustworthy face and uncrossed my legs and hands, and I breathed deeply, and then not at all, then too deeply. I was fake. I was giving him a fake me and was just going to sit there as long as it took for the cracks in me to appear. Slowly, I lowered my hands and held on the bottom of the chair as if I was toppled over. In a very quiet voice, he said, when you really want to be honest with me, come back. I don't think you're a bullshitter. I just don't think you have walked into my office to get help. You're here to con me, and you don't have to con me. You can tell the truth. I won't hold it against you. I couldn't look him in the eye. He had seen right through me. My motives were so pathetically obvious. Worse, I was just the same as every other jailhouse con who walked into his office looking to feed him a fake paint-by-numbers home life. And instead of standing out as something superior, I ended up just being one of the phonies. I stood up. I tried to open up more next time, I said quietly, and I left and never went back. One morning, Mr. Bowe took me down to a hole, which was a corridor in the isolation cell in the hospital wing, when he was doing basic medical rounds. Nobody got down there unless they had been done something really bad, like to get into a fight where someone got seriously hurt or to try to escape a guard. Help, came a cry from down the hall. Help me. He went down, and Mr. Bowe opened the solid steel cell door, and there was a naked guy lying face down on a mattress with a metal part of a broken light bulb up his ass. What happened here? Mr. Bowe asked. I was lying in bed and the bulb fell out of the ceiling and went into my booty. The three of us stared up in the empty light fixture. Bowe turned to me. Go back upstairs, get Dr. Sokol, and tell him to bring tweezers, disinfectant, and suture material. Move it. I ran all the way down the corridor. As I ran. I wished all the gates would open before me and I could just run and keep running as far from this place as I could go. But I couldn't run out of prison, and I didn't want. I did what I was told and got the doctor. I helped him gather his supplies, and as he trotted toward the hole to remove the broken light bulb from that grown man's ass, I went back to my cell. There was nothing to do but feel despair of that moment until after feeling it was over, I picked up my journal and wrote it down and emptied it out of me. When I reread what I'd written, was as if I had cast a spell on myself, and an entire experience filled me up again. I just couldn't get away from it. I poured myself into the book, and it poured itself back into me. It was like pouring one glass of water back and forth between two glasses. For a long time, I had known I wanted to write books, but I didn't have any help, and I didn't know what I was doing. So it took me a while to figure out that what I had to write and how to get started. While in prison, it occurred to me that when I lived at Davies, I could never write about something unsettling as what I had seen in the hole, because when I felt something so intense, I jumped up and took a walk, or I ran to a bar where I had a drink poured into me, and another until I was so numb I couldn't pour anything back into paper. I didn't have the patience to slow down and see that I had plenty of material to write about in high school. I just didn't have the confidence and determination to sit still and nurture it properly. My mistakes, my self-doubt, and insecurity got the best of me. Even as I crisscrossed Florida looking for juicy subjects, I missed them all. It seemed the harder I chased after a subject, the faster I ran in the wrong direction. Even while I was living in the Chelsea Hotel, while I was waiting for my sentencing, I spent more time looking into the mirror at my wounded face than I did into my notebook. And the only time I did settle down to write was when I was sitting in the Beaver writing the ship's log. Even then, I didn't think I was writing anything of value. And at sea, I was reading all the great books and ended up thinking I had nothing great to offer in return, but that was untrue. In prison, I got a second chance to realize I did have something to write about. I found plenty of serious subjects. I had plenty of time to write about them, and I couldn't get up and run away or drink or smoke dope. When I had my fill of serious subjects, I began to think about my life before prison, and I found so much more to write about. Prison may have been serious, but from within it, looking out my cell window, I knew life outside of prison was much more interesting. And as I sat in my yellow cell with my journal log on my lap, I understood I had come all the way to prison to realize that what I had in my past was so much richer than what was before me. My struggle as a writer was a lot like my life, I figured. I made up rules for myself and broke them and made others until I got it right.